We are especially grateful to welcome our patrons. We'd also like to remind everybody that the International Conference of the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies is in London starting in late July, so mark that for your diaries, and we very much hope to see you there. Today's talk was flagged as being myself and Ton. Ton, as ever, has done 99% of the work, and we'll deliver all but a tiny section of it. The talk actually was my suggestion. I found that somebody had sent me very good notes on the Cohen Azevedo family, but I was concerned that I didn't know whose notes they were and didn't want to use them. But of course, it turned out that they were Ton's notes, and so he will be our speaker today. Obviously, he needs no introduction to our regular viewers. For those who are not, he was archivist of the Netherlands Red Cross, and has made himself an absolute expert on Western Sephardic genealogy. And our talk today will be on the Cohen Azevedo family, and I will pass the floor to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for coming. Thank you to all our patrons who are here, and welcome to our viewers on YouTube. This represents the first generation of the Cohen Azevedo family. It's still a bit hypothetical because the name Daniel Cohen Azevedo comes from a tombstone of Isaac, his son, where it says Isaac the Daniel Cohen Azevedo. And that's the only place where we find that name. Isaac and Moses are attested brothers, but there might be a third brother, Abraham, who lived in Tetuan and had a son, Jacob. I assume that he is a brother, that's why he's in the picture here, but I'm not sure, and things can change when we get to know more. This is the first mention of an Isaac Cohen Azevedo in Amsterdam in 1638 in a notarial deed. Isaac contracts skipper Reijer Jacobs to load 15 lasts of goods and ship them to Tetuan. And Tetuan, as we just saw, was the place where his brother, assumed brother, Abraham lived. Isaac was in Amsterdam before he joined the Portuguese Jewish community. He paid his first taxes in 1640, in this case in Posta, together with David Curiel Rosado. As it turns out, David Curiel Rosado was his brother-in-law. And 2 years later, in 1642, his finta was increased from 20 to 30 guilders. Apparently he did well. And here is his brother Moses, who is assessed for the first time for 20 guilders. At first, Isaac is just one member of the community. This is the third brother. He is mentioned in a notarial deed of 1641 in connection to the family Marquez. Abraham was married to Rivka Marquez, and she was an inheritor of her father, Gaspar Mendes Marquez. And here her brothers and sisters are mentioned. They all sign except Rivka because she is in Tetuan. At first, Isaac is just an ordinary member of the community. He signs the original escamot of Talmud Torah in 1639. That's the signature to the left above. Below is the signature under a revision of the escamot of a few years later. But then, over the years, he served in a few functions in the Amsterdam community. As a Parnas de Hebra in 1643, board member of Abudat Ahesed, a charity, in 1645, as a Parnas, the Talmud Torah, the school, as a member of the Mahamat in 1652, and finally as a treasurer in 1654. As he was one of the richer members of the community, he joined Dotar, a prestigious charity. It says here, fue pedido pelo señor Isaac Cohen de Azevedo, que quería ser hermano. So he is admitted, and normally new members signed here. So it could very well be that he was on one of his business trips. Charity Dotar gave away dowries to young girls, orphan girls, and it worked throughout the Western Sephardic diaspora, from Gdansk to Spain, later to Brazil. Even in Spain, that was not a mistake of mine. Young girls from Spain could apply for a dowry, but they would only get it if they left Spain and married a Sephardic man. Here is in a nutshell how the succession of Cohen de Azevedos happened over the years. Each member got a number and each successor got the same number. Very simple but effective form of administration. First, his son Daniel Cohen de Azevedo from Hamburg inherited the membership of his father in 1679, 4 years after the death of his father. Then, 9 years later, in 1699, Isaac Cohen de Azevedo followed in the footsteps of Daniel, and he did so with permission of his own father, David Cohen de Azevedo, who happened to be a brother of Daniel Cohen de Azevedo. So this second Isaac is a grandson of Ishak, the original member of Dota. This David had died in 1690, so it took some years for Isaac to take over. And after that, Daniel, brother of this second Isaac, took possession of his place in Dotar. And after that, it's pretty straightforward. Then the next in line is David, son of Daniel, and after him, it's Daniel, son of David. And we touch here upon the subject of a lack of fantasy among family members to invent new given names. It's always named after the father, and the son is again named after his father. So it's always Daniel or David or Raphael, or Isaac, and sometimes Abraham. Isaac Cohen had the distinction of being mentioned in the archives of the Portuguese Inquisition. In this case, he is mentioned in the Processo de João da Aguilar in 1650. I will spare you the Portuguese, since my pronunciation of Portuguese is not very well. It says, more or less, Isaac Cohen de Azevedo, new Christian, of whom I do not know the Jewish name, born in this city, and in this context, that is Lisbon, married to a Jewish woman named Sarabella. And Isaac is tall, thin, he has a dark complexion. And he is in 1650, 30 years old, maybe a few years older or younger.
So sorry if I can interrupt. It says it doesn't know the Christian name, not he doesn't know the Jewish name.
Okay, I couldn't read that. There's a question mark here. The question.
Yes, excellent. But
in fact,
what's kind of interesting is the Cohen, because this is like 150 years after Jews have forcibly been converted. Have they remembered that they're Cohens, or have they just sort of invented it for a bit of extra kudos when they reached Amsterdam? And maybe a DNA test, if we can find a direct patrilineal descendant, will answer that. But no, so sorry to interrupt.
Well, Isaac, as we saw, was an international trader, but he found another job that was at times paying quite well, freeing slaves, mostly Christian slaves, from captivity and Barbary. In this deed, he agrees to undertake the freeing of Cornelis Jans, who is a slave in Salé, Morocco. Frans Banning Kok is a guarantor for the money that will be needed. The deed mentions no fixed sum, but mentions all the costs involved, which will be paid for later. So Frans Banning Kok is the guarantor, and maybe he was family of this Cornelis Jans, or a friend, or a business partner, or the family went to him to ask for his support. And you may not know the name Frans Banning Kok, but you must be sure you know for sure what he looked like, because he's the central figure in the Night Watch, painted by Rembrandt. I'll put my cursor to his presentation here. So Isaac had some well-established connections. Isaac, again, he can be followed in the so-called journalen of the Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam. And up until the year 1662, he pays his vintas, and at times imposta and promesas. Then, for the time being, his payments stop from 1662 until 1666, and then they pick up again. But they continue only to 1668, and the payments stop again. And that at first I could not find a grave for him. I thought he might have gone to England first. And 1668 is also the date on the tombstone in the cemetery of Bevis Marks of an Isaac de Azevedo. and that got me confused for some time. But here is his gravestone, and you can find it in Hamburg. It's mentioned by Michael Studemund Halevi, who wrote a classic about all the graves of Hamburg, all the Sephardic graves, and gives biographical details as well as genealogical details. And this is the gravestone where it says son of Daniel. And the photograph is courtesy of Laura Arnold Leibman, who has it on her website. He was buried in May 1675. And Michael Studemund adds that in 1668, Isaac Cohen de Azevedo asked for permission to settle with his family in Hamburg. And that nails the case. This must be the same Isaac as was present in Amsterdam. We don't know the reason why he went to Hamburg, because, and it is a bit strange, because the migration was mostly the other way around. Next, we have the Boer manuscript, which tell us about, among others, the family Curiel Rosado. To the left is the family complete with great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and you find the parents under number two, and I enlarged a bit. And you can see that one of the daughters of Alonso Diaz Rosado, alias David Curiel Rosado, married with Isaac Cohen de Azevedo. And right below that is his brother Moses, who married not one but two Cohen de Azevedos, but not at the same time, of course. One of the brothers of the women of the Cohen de Azevedos is a Moses Curiel Rosado, and that is the one that we saw earlier paying imposta together with Isaac. The Boer manuscript, there are a few of them, but this one is from Etzchaim, and you can consult it on the website of Etzchaim. Then we come to Moses. And Moses Cohen de Azevedo, as we saw, was for the first time in Amsterdam in 1642. And this is his marriage ban, written in a bad script with Jael Curiel Rosado. And both the groom and the bride are from Lisbon. So they might already have met there. And as we saw, Isaac was also from Lisbon. So I'm quite sure that the family had its origin Lisbon. That will make it difficult to go further back, because most of the archives of Lisbon and its churches and municipal government were buried during the earthquake of 1742. This is his family, and you see that I made a mistake here. Jael Curiel Rosado died after having been married to Moses only 1 year. And in fact, the children of Moses are from his second marriage with Esther Curiel Rosado. He has 3 daughters, Jael, Abigail, and Deborah. And Deborah married her cousin Daniel Cohen Azevedo. That is the one who became a member of Dotar, and he lived in Hamburg, he died in Hamburg. Together they had 2 children, but these died young, and it might be that Jael and Abigail had offspring, but the branch of this Daniel stops with him and his children. Here's a declaration that I found in an archive of famous Van Manen, who was a minister during Napoleonic times in Holland, and he collected autographs. So he collected, above all, autographs of famous persons, which most collectors of autographs do. And this is a declaration made at the request of Moses Cohen Azevedo. I'll give you the text in English. In the image, it is in Dutch. We, undersigned, declare to be true that in 1650 in Sali, Barbary, we knew Moses Cohen Azevedo as a person of good name and fame. No one could be found with the same skills and tact. Therefore, the late Johan van Galen installed him as consul of the Dutch nation in Sali, Barbary. And Van Galen used his services. And this is undersigned by C. Tromp and Isaac Sweers. And these persons are famous in Dutch history for they were admirals of the Dutch fleet, as was Jan van Galen. We find the mayor to the left, Cornelis Tromp, and he is famous in Holland and infamous in England, as David can attest. In the middle is Johan van Galen, who was deceased by the time of the declaration and therefore couldn't sign, and to the right is Isaac Sweers. Jan van Galen led an invasion of Morocco in 1649 and established an outpost for the Dutch there, which after a while lapsed. But he nominated Moses Cohen Azevedo as a consul. Then there's a second declaration, and that one reads as follows. I'll give you the English translation. We, undersigned, declare by this that we know Moses Cohen Azevedo, living in Sali, Barbary, but now present in Amsterdam, a person of good name and fame, well skilled in trade and having solid knowledge of and skills in trading with Barbary and adjacent countries. For a long time, he specialized in freeing Christian slaves in Sali and surroundings in a facile way, and not unimportant, against a reasonable ransom, to the great comfort of the miserable prisoners, all of which has been known for a long time. And it's signed in January 1672 by, among others, Antonio Lopez Suazo, who later became a baron, and Jacob Pereira, a rich merchant in Amsterdam. And what we learned from this, in 1650 he was installed as Dutch consul, and he makes a living there in trade and the freeing of Christian slaves. And in 1671, you find him in Amsterdam collecting letters of recommendation from the rich and influential of the day, and probably with an eye to promote his business. But in 1672, England, France, and 2 German states declared war on Holland. And this might have put an end to Moses' trade projects. And it made it also difficult for him to go back to Morocco as the English blockaded the Dutch. And it made it also difficult for his family to join them, so they stayed there. And Moses died in 1674 and is buried in Bet Chaim. And while his wife and children were still in Morocco. Having trouble to maybe I should that's it. As we saw, Moses, Cohen, Azevedo had only daughters, and in 1685 the uncle, Moses Curio Rosado, whom we mentioned before, died. He made the last will, and in it he makes a special allotment for the daughters of Moses Cohen Azevedo, probably because their father was no longer alive and they were still unmarried and could need it. And 2 of the sisters live in Saleh still, Abigail and Jael, and the 3rd one, Deborah, lived in Hamburg. In 1700, there was a declaration addressed to the Mahamat of Amsterdam, Pomli Worden, and it mentions the same Jael and Abigail. And Abigail is married to, is the widow of an Abraham Cohen. And the 2nd one, Jael, is the wife of Jacob Cohen. I haven't been able to identify these persons, but maybe that will happen sometime. Then we go to the next generation. And we start with Joseph Cohen Azevedo, the son of Isaac. He's first mentioned in London in 1676, which is also the first year that there was an annual account for Bevis Marks. Earlier annual accounts may have existed, but are not preserved. And you see here near the bottom that he offers money for prayers to be said for his father, for his deceased father. And 1676, of course, is only 1 year after Isaac died in Hamburg. So the son had moved to England, maybe to make a better buck. Here's an overview of his family. I'm sorry that it's so small that people probably can't read it. So I'll mention the names. Abigail, and she married with the later Chazan, Abraham of Isaac de Sola. And then there's Leah, and she married Moses Sola Silvera, who actually was a brother of the Chazan Abraham. And there's Ribka, and she married with, let me see, Abraham the Judah Cohen, and I don't know who that was. And then there's Daniel, and he continues the the family Cohen Azevedo, he marries with Esther de Mose Fermi. She's from Amsterdam, so the marriage took place in Amsterdam, and that has confused earlier researchers, because in the same year another Daniel Cohen Azevedo also married, but that one was a son of Isaac, not of Joseph. I hope I'm saying this right, because I keep confusing all the Daniels and the Davids. And then there's Sarah Cohen Azevedo and the Jacob Cohen Azevedo. And they died unmarried, had no offspring. And here, David will take over and tell a little bit about Joseph Cohen Azevedo.
So this is a slight side story, but very, very pertinent at the moment. Last week, the British Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Parliament couldn't unilaterally hold a vote on Scottish independence, and that whole everything goes back to this event that we're just about to look at. The crowns of England and Scotland had been united when Queen Elizabeth I of England died. Scotland was very much the junior partner in this alliance, and was looking for ways to increase its wealth. And it hit on this idea of establishing a colony in a place called Darien, which is today in Panama. And what the idea was, and we're talking sort of 3 centuries before the Panama Canal, that rather than going around the bottom of South America when going to sort of China and Japan and the Far East, that people could unload their goods on the Caribbean side of the Isthmus of Panama and carry it across, and the Scottish colony there could get rich from that. And it was a brilliant idea, sort of centuries ahead of its time. The Scots tried to raise money in England, but the English East India Company were against it, so they stopped the Scots from raising money in England, and the project was led by the man in the picture, William Paterson, who was a Scot. He had founded the Bank of England, but had later returned to Scotland, and the idea was to found this colony called New Caledonia. It's obviously different from the New Caledonia today in the Pacific, with a city called New Edinburgh. Tom, could you go to the next slide, please? So they raised money in Scotland, and all of the great and the good and the middle classes of Scotland invested in this project. It was sort of terribly organized, so that they took all the wrong equipment, lots of wigs and hats with them to Panama, and they thought that if they took lots of mirrors and combs, they could trade that with the local people. But when they got there, the locals were not interested in mirrors and combs, and also they didn't realize that essentially they were moving to a malarial swamp, and the project ultimately failed, and Scotland was essentially bankrupt, and the English offered them essentially to pay off the debts in return for the 2 parliaments being merged into one, and of course there was Scottish devolution came in with Tony Blair, As I say, last week the Scottish government were defeated in the Supreme Court about holding another referendum. But that's sort of how we came to the current political situation we have. But if you look at these the documents on the right, you will see a lot of Scottish names. William Paterson, as we said, had been the founder of the Bank of England. Jacob Foulis was the sea captain who proposed the idea. And all the other names seem to be Scottish, except Joseph Cohen de Azevedo. We have no idea, as of now, how or why he was involved. I mean, the speculation may be as he knew William Paterson from London, but it's just one of these strange little things in which a Sephardic Jew was involved, and perhaps history sort of turned on that, perhaps like arranging the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella, or of King Charles II of England with the Portuguese princess, which gave England its colonies in India. So as I say, it's just a little curiosity, and perhaps somebody here knows more about it. That's one of the things that Joseph Cohen de Azevedo was up to. So Tom, back to you. Oh, so sorry, Francis is desperately waving.
I've put Keats's poem "Silent upon a Peak in Darien" into the chat.
Yes.
Not Have I Travelled in the Realms of Gold? That one.
Yes.
I thought it might be of mild interest. That's all.
Thank you.
Not at all.
Tom, back to you.
Joseph Cohen de Azevedo died in 1705, and he would have been buried on the old cemetery of Marks, were it not that there had just been a row within the community in which Joseph was on the wrong side, and because he died at the moment that he was still banned from the community, his body was not allowed to be interred in the Sephardic cemetery. And there's still, it says here that it can still be seen in the neighboring Ashkenazi one, although I don't know if that's still the case. As close as possible to the wall that separates the cemetery, so he could feel close to the other Sephardis. This is an amusing story about some of his children. The rich merchant Abraham Rodriguez Marquez had left capital from which young brides could get a dowry, and he had set aside £50 for Abigail Cohen de Azevedo and £50 for her sister Sarah. And it's Jacob Cohen de Azevedo and his brother Daniel who pushed for it to be expressed in the decision of the Mahamat, so that they can be sure to collect the money when these two girls get married. And the nice thing about this, that these girls sign themselves. Literacy among Sephardic women was high in Amsterdam, something like 75%. But still, it's nice to see practiced signatures of these two ladies. And they feminized the name Cohen into Kahanet. So what Jacob and Daniel did next was going looking for grooms. And they found one for Abigail, Daniel Lopez Pereira. and they had a sort of contract with him in which he was promised 2,000 guilders, 200 pounds dowry. But the problem was that the mother of Daniel Lopez, Leah Lopez Pereira, didn't agree to that. And greatest objection was that there was no provision for ketubah. They were to be married by the commons. So she called that a scandal and reported it to the Mahamat, and the Mahamat reacted and put Jacob and his brother Daniel into Gerem until further notice. Mostly that was not a problem. You paid the fine, you said you're sorry from the Teba, and that was it. Here's an overview of the Amsterdam family. We are now switching and come back to the London family later. And it begins with David Cohen Azevedo, who was a son of Isaac. And in this overview, I only put in the sons because the overview would have been unreadable if I included the ladies. So sorry to the ladies. David Cohen Azevedo had a son, Daniel, and he continued as the only one. The family line. Daniel Cohen had a son, David, in turn, and he became Chacham of Amsterdam. And he was married to Esther Atias. And only yesterday I found out that Esther Atias was the daughter of an Amsterdam printer, Abraham Atias. I don't know if he printed Bibles that became as famous as the Bible of Isaac Atias, and if there was a relation somehow. But he was a printer in his own right. And he was able to give Esther, his daughter, a dowry of 10,000 guilders. And in his last will, he stipulated that after his death, which was imminent, the shop was to be closed and everything was to be kept as it was until Esther got married to a suitable husband who was neat and of good character. And then maybe the two could open up the shop again. So David Cohen, the Azevedo, inherited a printer shop, but in the end, he didn't use it. I don't know if and when the couple sold it, but it must have been sold. And perhaps with the ongoing digitization and indexation of Amsterdam notarial archives, we'll find it someday. David Cohen Azevedo had a son, Daniel, and that one in turn also became Chacham of Amsterdam. Here we have David Cohen Azevedo to the right. I'm beginning to like him more and more because I think he's a very nice-looking man, amused, intelligent. But on the whole, I couldn't find praise for this Chacham, like for his predecessors, Sol Levi Mortero, or Salomon de Oliveiro, or Salomon Arion, who all earned their biographies or articles. None of that kind for David Cohen Azevedo. He died in 1792 after having been a Chacham for 10 years, during which he had the pleasure of greeting the stadholder of Holland, Willem V, in the synagogue in Amsterdam. And as usual, he blessed him within the synagogue. He was very orange-minded and also composed sermons in praise of Willem V, of which we saw an example in the beginning of the presentation on the first slide. You also see here the hands that are folded in a special way in the greeting, now the blessings of the Cohen.
Can I also just make an observation that in the picture of him, behind him on a wall is a coat of arms and a sort of coronet, which looks like the one that we saw on the Hamburg grave.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the coat of arms is, if it's sort of of another Azevedo family in Portugal or who it might be, but that might be worth checking.
Mm-hmm. And what about the name Cohen? It's surely they didn't they weren't named Cohen back in Portugal. It must have been the Azevedo, and Isaac was Hendrik de Azevedo.
Well, hopefully the Avatona DNA project, if they can find an Azevedo male line descendant, can test the DNA, and maybe it will match a known Cohen lineage. But I think it's an interesting point, because it would suggest that there was that memory of Jewish identity that remained in the family for 150 years. Yeah, I think that's quite neat.
Mm-hmm. And here we have the son, Daniel Cohen de Azevedo. Again, like his father, he wasn't remarkable. But we have the pleasure of having a picture of his. And, well, he has the eyes of his father, and his dress is something similar. It's the dress that the Portuguese Chachamim borrowed from the reverends in the Protestant church. They had a dress like that. And that in turn came from the Paris universities in the Middle Ages, who dressed like this in a black toga with a little shawl under the beard. Here you can see it better. And both wear tricorn hats with 3 corners. Back to the London family, it starts with another Daniel Cohen, who used to be confused with the other Daniel Cohen of Amsterdam. He married Esther de Mozafermi, and this Daniel, his name was inherited by their son Moses. He was called Moses Cohen de Azevedo Ferme. Born in London, died in London, married twice, first to Sarah Gomez de Mesquita and then to Sarah Henriquez Faro. From his first wife, he had 1 son, and I still have to work out how to work with a genealogical program so that would be rendered in a just way. There is a portrait of Moses Cohen de Azevedo. It's in the book by Raster, with the history of the first 2 centuries of Bevis Mark 1701 to 1901. But the quality was bad to begin with. I scanned it, and the scan was even worse, so I won't present it here. Sarah Gomez de Mesquita was the daughter of Moses Gomez de Mesquita, who was also Chacham of Bevis Marks. And Moses Cohen Azevedo followed in his footsteps. There was a bit of a row surrounding his appointment because Moses was a pupil of Isaac Nieto, and Isaac Nieto had hoped or wished to become Chacham himself. And he nearly exploded and declared that Moses Cohen Azevedo was not fit to become Chacham. But he became Chacham. Back to this picture, to the left you see Daniel Cohen Azevedo, and he was not the very first one to go to the Americas. In the earlier generation to the right, you see Elio Cohen Azevedo, and he was buried on Jamaica in 1820. He cannot be totally sure because he would have been 90 years old by then. He didn't leave the last will, and but it's probably the uncle of the Daniel to the left, and this Daniel went to Jamaica in 1802 or 1803. And this Daniel lived on a salary of 40 pounds, and he declared in a letter to the Mahamat of Marks that he couldn't afford to live in London anymore on 40 pounds a year. He had many children, they all needed to be fed and to be educated, and it simply would not do. So he looked around and he saw that there was a position free on Jamaica, and the letter is not clear if Jamaica invited him or that he invited himself to Jamaica. But the letter is, very nice and amusing. And I'll read a little bit of it. Gentlemen, I have to acknowledge the receipt of the resolution passed by the gentlemen Valios on my letters of 4th of June and 28th October last to the Mahamat and Valios respectively. This resolution delivered me by Mr. Castro, the secretary, and was accompanied with 40 pounds. So that's 1 year's salary.
It's being suggested that that might not be, that we may have two people confused. David, do you want to unmute yourself? I'm sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, I know you did the work, but I think the issue was that the Haram that you mentioned at Bevis Marks, his son, which was from the first marriage, the one child, as you mentioned, from
that's right,
was the son, and I believe he was the one.
Yes.
He didn't show up on the chart. Is the one that went to Jamaica in 1802 in the document you were summarizing before.
Yeah,
his family.
He appears in the chart with the wrong mother. He's on the left below.
Oh, you're calling him Daniel, but you're saying he's from the second marriage, but he's technically from the first marriage.
In this chart, it says he's from the second marriage, but he's really from the first marriage.
Okay, correct. Then that's right. That's the Daniel that went there, and the work we're trying to figure out upon arrival in Kingston.
It's my clumsiness with genealogical programs.
Okay.
That caused this.
Thank you.
So we are both right. And Daniel goes on, I must crave the favor and honor of your being the interpreter of my grateful sentiments to the values. I trust your goodness will do it in a more appropriate manner than I can. So it's a bit of early 18th century civility. So he goes to Jamaica and brings his whole family. And this one is not in the right place. And he did so by ship. In the letter he mentions that he found a ship to carry him to Jamaica, and the ship's name was France. And apparently there were a lot of ships named France, and they are mentioned in the Lloyd's ship register and of 1803, and it's at the bottom, France, and then the captain is F. Reeds, who is also mentioned in the letter. So this ship sailed to Jamaica with the family on board. I'm not totally sure, but pretty sure. It's unclear what happened to Daniel Cohen Azevedo in Jamaica. We assume that he was inaugurated as a Khazan there, and that he functioned for a number of years, but we can find no tombstone. And David Simon is hoping that newspapers of the time may provide more information. There was another branch of the Cohen Azevedo family which went to the Americas. This is a chart from Malcolm Stern's book, First Jewish Families in America. It begins with the same person as I did, Daniel, then Chacham Moses, and he also has the wrong, well, he has all the children in one go, but he doesn't mention who is whose child. So Daniel, to the left, is the one we talked about just now. In the middle is Benjamin. He stayed in London, but his son Moses also went to America, and he went first to the Caribbean, but he died in Philadelphia. But he kept a sort of business diary in which he also mentions family events like the birth of a boy, and which he named Benjamin in honor of his father. He doesn't mention the name of his wife though, and he never does. But his wife was Hannah Samuels, and he married her in Suriname. The diary also mentions all of his travels. Departed from Suriname with all my family, that is his wife and first son, Benjamin. And he visited, well, he traveled up and down, presumably with merchant goods between Suriname, Curaçao, Barbados, and Martinique. And the second half of this entry mentions that his brother Daniel Cohen Azevedo had departed this life. And maybe this is the Daniel we were talking about just now. I didn't realize that until now, David. His brother Daniel died the 9th of September 1816, according to his nephew, Moses of Benjamin. What do you think?
It could be. There's so many Daniels and so many other ones. It's but if Jeanette is on the line too, she might know.
Can't be. Moses also had a brother Daniel. Is he here in the picture? No, not mentioned. So maybe he is referring to this Daniel. Who knows? And then the last, he mentions his daughters Judith and Deborah. And that's it.
Thank you.
I left out 95% of what is out there in order to stay within the hour.
Yeah, there were a lot of sermons that we were looking through, of about sort of 35 pages long, and I don't know if they would be so well received these days, rather than anything else. David, are you holding your hand up?
Yes, I was just going to mention just briefly that Tom did a magnificent job explaining it, and the departure of at least some of the family from Europe to either the Caribbean. I should say that in the research I've done on the Azevedos, they went to primarily Jamaica, but then there were Barbados, then there was St. Thomas, then there was Panama. Most of them left the Caribbean, and those that were in the New World sort of gravitated to America or Canada. In America, it was primarily going into the seaports. So it was New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, Philadelphia, New York. And so there's a lot of descendants of Cohen de Azevedo in the USA and Canada. But then there's a group, of course, that remained in the UK. And then you find some of those descendants, not only in the UK, but in Australia and New Zealand. It seems like everybody wanted to go to an English-speaking country amongst all these many, many descendants.
Thank you.
Stephen,
May I say something?
Yeah.
The interesting thing about a lot of the ones that stayed in London is they changed the name to Owen. They went from Cohen de Azevedo to Cohen, then Owen, O-W-E-N.
Yeah.
Very Welsh.
I should say, in addition to that, most of the ones I find the descendants are no longer Jewish. Some of them became reverends in other churches, interestingly. So there's just a few, I'm not going to say all, but maybe 20% of the descendants are actually Jewish today, I think, in that. But ironically, some of them, like in New Orleans and else, have remained. So
yes, we have.
Thank you. Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of things to mention that the Haham Moses Cohen d'Azevedo is buried along with his wife Sarah, obviously the second one. They were reinterred at Golders Green Cemetery. They would have been removed from the Novo Cemetery, but because he was someone who was important, he was one of the very few people who were reinterred rather than being, shall I say, dumped elsewhere. So it mentions it would be a new headstone, or it's one of those flat stones in the Sephardic section of Hoop Lane Cemetery. It gives his date of death as the 24th of September, 1784, and Sarah's as 10th of March, 1797. These are ancestors of mine. Going to Stern's genealogy, the tree, Rachel is mentioned there as marrying Manasseh de Isaac Delgado. They went to Jamaica in the year 1800 with their family, all mentioned in Bevis Marks registers, the births. And Rachel, well, both of them died in Jamaica. She died in 1824 and he in 1815. And these are my ancestors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce, you had your hand up, and then we can go back to David.
Yeah, just quick. What is this history Tom mentioned of Sephardim negotiating the sale or the freedom of Christian slaves? I know it the other way around, but what was that about, Tom? I don't know that.
Well, Sephardim knew their languages, so they were often hired as negotiators by those who didn't understand the languages. I assume that Moses Cohen, the Azevedo at least, must have known how to speak Arabic. But he also spoke Portuguese, and he will have known Spanish, and maybe he picked up some Dutch. And Isaac will have known Dutch, Portuguese, and Spanish. So they could negotiate it with local leaders. The second thing is that they had connections everywhere, like Isaac was in Amsterdam and Moses was in Saleh, but that's no exception. There were lots of families in which the sons divided sometimes over 3 continents in order to business with each other and to have trusted business partners in other parts of the world. And Christians recognize that. Other examples of Jews doing the same jobs, like Isaac Palash.
And once they negotiated the freedom of the slave, was there any further relationship to that person who they had freed?
Was there any what? Any
relationship? I mean, did they come into the business? Or they just were freed and left to their own devices? What happened to those people?
When they were freed, in the contract that I showed, there's a stipulation about that they would have to have travel money, money to eat, money for clothes, day-to-day allowance. So they travel back to Holland mostly.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
David.
I just want to mention 2 things interesting. One is you mentioned I think this is the history of Bevis Marx, the animosity between Isaac Nieto and Moses Daniel Cohen de Azevedo that assumed the position as Haram. But I believe they were related. They were cousins, not maybe first or maybe it was second cousins. So it's sort of interesting that I found them related, yet that didn't seem to make any difference, although we all know we have family members sometimes that aren't quite our best friends. The other thing was I noticed that the Am wasn't noted as particularly, let's say, the most expert, or there wasn't a whole lot of glowing stories about him as the Am at Bevis Marx. But it was interesting that he assumed the position, I believe, in 1761 to 1784. And for us colonists over here on the other side of the pond, we recognize that time period as particularly important, in that I guess he gave a sermon on the ascension of George III to the crown, and if I recall, he even said some nasty words about these violent colonists on the other side of the ocean. So I guess we've returned that favor over the last 50 years, in that we've not lost yet to England in a World Cup match.
Well, I guess equivalent sermons were probably given in congregations in what's now the United States on the accession of George III.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. And I believe there was even a Cohen
just...
de Azevedo rabbi, 80 could confirm either it was Savannah or Charleston, who did run into some issues. And I'm not sure if it was because he did that And as a result, and we weren't quite yet, I think, independent. So there might have been an issue there.
It was Benjamin.
Sorry.
It was Benjamin. He, one of Moses's other sons was Benjamin, and he went to Beth Elohim in Charleston in the early 1800s. And after about a year, they fired him and sent him back to England.
So it may not have been the Revolutionary War, but some other controversy.
Maybe they just didn't like him.
And just David, to pick up on something you said, and because I'm a member of Bevis Marks, but the sheer awfulness of refusing to bury somebody in your own cemetery because you're feuding with them is just appalling, and it doesn't even surprise me in our congregation, but it is just appalling. If
I'm correct, Bevis Marks does not have a ha'am for some time now. They've not had a chief rabbi.
We have a senior rabbi within the congregation. The last ha'am was he remained ha'am after he departed until his death, but there hasn't been a resident ha'am, I think, since the early 70s. No, earlier, since the 60s. Solomon Gayon, he went to New York.
So there's a chair. I understand there's a chair on the bima or somewhere that is empty and no one has sat in that since. So do we direct descendants?
No, not at Bevis Marks. We have a big ha'am's chair which is not used. At Lauderdale Road Synagogue, there's a sort of niche next to the ark where the ha'am would sit, but now the senior rabbi will sit in a chair in front of it. We are that petty.
So if a direct descendant of one of the ha'ams comes, do we get to occupy that chair for a short period of time?
No, you probably get sort of abused by the security guard on the door.
No benefits.
No, we were there, and we did not get any
for a donation, offer. For a sizable donation.
For a donation, maybe. We were not doing that.
I'm afraid the congregation isn't even that smart to get donations from people. Bob, the rabbi of Bevis Marks is Rabbi Shalom Morris. He is one rabbi within a congregation which covers several synagogues. The senior rabbi is Rabbi Joseph Dweck, who ordinarily is at Lauderdale Road Synagogue, which is the biggest synagogue in the congregation. Do we have any questions? We don't have any questions on YouTube. Ton, is there anything else we can add? Actually, Ton and David both, if we were to look for male line descendants of the Cohen Azevedo family, first of all, do you know anybody, Adrian too, do you know anybody? And if not, I mean, where should we be looking? Is this in the United States or where?
I think you have one on the broadcast. I think it's David's son.
Well,
he's not a direct.
He's not a direct on the male side.
It has to be for YDNA.
Does it have to be on the males?
Male.
Doesn't have
direct male line.
Okay.
Yeah, and the issue is
Azevedo or Owen, I suppose.
You go a few generations down in Jamaica, but then you get to, as I recall, Sima. Now, if her brother is alive, one of the descendants of her brother, those are entirely the male line of Cohen de Azevedo.
Right.
Those did end up in the States, some of them. So there might be somebody there.
Yes.
I don't think we've contacted anybody. David, have you? I haven't.
I don't know. But what are you looking for? To do a DNA? To do
if one of these gentlemen could be tested by the Avatenu DNA project, it would be really interesting, because we could see, first of all, if he connects to any other lineages, and also it might be really curious on the Cohen lineage. I'm not sure if there are any known Western Sephardic Cohen lineages. I mean, the Belenfantes are Cohens, but they claim to be Western Sephardic, but we now know they came from the Balkans. So that would be
so David, this is Adam. I can't get my video to work.
Yeah.
There are others like the Cohen Labaton family, which settled in Charleston and then New Orleans, and they're now in Texas. So there are some out there, and of course there's Ainsley, right? Who was a Cohen.
Oh, yes, good point. Yes.
Well, Ainsley's not on the Cohen de Azevedo side. I can tell you that.
He's a Cohen Henriquez.
Correa Mendez,
No,
they married into the Cohen.
Yeah. I'm just discussing the nature of the Cohen lineages.
And do any of these connect?
Yes.
To known Cohen lineages?
No, they do not.
Okay.
And but any of the families like Owen we mentioned earlier would qualify.
Yeah.
Right.
The Owen family.
Correct.
And there seems to be some folks in Florida. We just got a name yesterday as a possibility, but I think if we could put our heads together, we can make quick work of this. So I'm gonna
agree.
Maybe reach out to some of you. We can talk about it.
Thank you, Adrienne. You're waving.
Yeah. No, count me in. I'll talk about anything you want. I'd be happy to participate. One thing I did notice, and it's not a direct lineage, but when you showed the drawing of Hacham Daniel, David, you don't, maybe Debbie knows, but all of a sudden it struck me that he looks like my grandmother. The nose and eyes look just like my grandmother, and I thought that's really weird. I never noticed that.
That's a cousin. Actually, they're the cousin.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
my grandmother lived a long time.
I know.
But it was really amazing. The nose and eyes just struck me.
Yeah, I got those images from the internet a long time ago.
Yeah, I did too.
Now you cannot find them anywhere anymore.
On my tree, you can.
When does the new museum open at Bevis Marks, David?
That is a good question. We will be having the people who are in charge of that project speak to us in, I think, March. Of course, it got hugely delayed because of COVID. So the honest answer is I don't know. Actually, just to remind everybody, the first day of Hanukkah is in 2 weeks today, and actually I'll go to Bevis. I've been away for COVID reasons and then health reasons, so I'll see if I can ask then. But please God, next year. Tom, perhaps it's time to wind up if nobody else has anything to add. So I'd like to thank our special speaker this week, our special guest speaker, Tom Thielen, and I suspect we shall be hearing from him again fairly soon. And many thanks, of course, to everybody who's joined us both on Zoom and on YouTube, particularly on Zoom, because you sort of keep the show on the road. I know we're suppressing it a bit, but if anyone is planning to either come to Europe or come to the UK, then perhaps try to come in late July and attend the Jewish Genealogical Conference, and perhaps we can have a physical get-together. Tom, is there anything more to be said?
Yes, thank you to Francis for that lovely poem.
Yes.
And thank you for watching. and see you all next week.
Goodbye.